I really don't know anything about this topic, so maybe it's best if I actually am subbed out of this.
No, you should learn about it.
Look, it's about ethics in games journalism, okay? Welcome to another episode of Political Dregs. I'm Calvin Robinson, former Conservative, former Brexit Party candidate. With me is Hamish Hunter, also former Tory. We've got Amir Sajady, former everything, every single tick box you can think of. He's been there, done it. He was a Tory, he was Change UK, he was a Lib Dem. And joining us today is a special guest, a very old friend of mine and Amir's. We've known him far longer than we'd like to admit, because we'll give away our age. But Adam Tong is a video game streamer. And Adam, introduce yourself. What would you say you are? What's your job?
I'm a broadcaster on Twitch, and yeah, I put some YouTube videos up every now and again, but generally a full-time Twitch broadcaster.
There we go. So it's fantastic to have you on here because I know you've got some quite left-wing opinions, and I know you kind of you like to air them every now and then. So I'm interested.
Opinions.
I'm interested to see what you're going to say.
On our podcast.
That's two in a row.
Ashamedly, I will say I voted for David Cameron when he first got in, and I deeply regret that decision, and I'll have to take that to my grave. And recently, I voted for Labour in the most recent EG. So you know, but mainly because of how much I dislike the current establishment. But okay. I consider myself centrist, but you know, it's 6 to 2 degrees sometimes, isn't it?
It is. So we're going to talk about video games because obviously this is, you know, I used to work in games, Amir used to work in games, you are very much in games at the current moment, and everything's changing I think it's changing quite drastically. Take any kind of movement that's happening in the real world in current events, such as Black Lives Matter, and you can guarantee that video games will be on top of it somehow, in some shape or form.
Well, I was going to say, I think, you know, as an entertainment industry, gaming is bigger than music and film put together in terms of annual revenue and turnover. So, yeah, I mean, if something social is going on within the human race, then it should be reflected in the entertainment mediums that we have, and games is the biggest one. So,
but how should it be reflected, Adam? That's the question.
Well, by the people that make it, and in the way that they see fit. I mean, obviously, this is the thing. What's the right and wrong is so grey in so many different ways, especially when talking about things to do with social justice and things that are perceived to be right and wrong by certain people and not by others. But then, okay, well, what does the law say? So, you know, I think that the arts have always had a slightly left-leaning view and kind of outlook, and I think that maybe that's because they're generally made by younger people, and younger people tend to lean more to the left.
There is a tradition there, isn't there, that the left tend to create the arts and the right consume them, which I've always found fascinating, because the amount of people in the arts that would scream Tory cuts and everything, when it's the Tories that have always subsidised and kept the arts afloat. But I want to get into Black Lives Matter in particular, just because this is a movement that's obviously very controversial, because most people would assume that Black Lives Matter, as in the phrase that black people matter. However, the movement Black Lives Matter has quite political connotations.
Who owns that movement? Who's in charge of it? There are lots and lots of people who are doing things under the banner of Black Lives Matter, and who is to say which of them are true Black Lives Matter supporters and are doing negative things or positive things in the name of Black Lives Matter? It's very difficult to... It's very easy to point the finger at somebody who's ripping down a statue and saying, look, they're vandalising things, they're doing awful things. Yes, they are. But are they doing that because they're anarchists and they're just jumping into a protest where they can get anonymity? Or are they genuinely protesting for Black Lives Matter?
But does it matter? I mean, if these people are doing illegal activities and kind of they're aggressive and violent, all these things, maybe we shouldn't use that movement to promote whatever they're doing. Maybe we should, if we care about Black lives, maybe we should look at other ways of promoting Black lives rather than that using that banner that is tarred.
But then how many times do you retreat away from your own banner when somebody else tarnishes it?
But in this particular instance, from the beginning, it's been anti-capitalist, it's been anti-family, it's been anti-Semitic. All of these things have been part of the movement itself. So it's not people hijacking it. This is part of Black Lives Matter.
I can't say that I've seen any anti-Semitism.
The Black Lives Matter UK Twitter account, Adam, is all over Israel at the moment.
I don't care about who owns a specific Twitter account. They're not the president of Black Lives Matter.
But they are. They are the movement in the
globe,
UK. In the UK, Black Lives Matter, the movement itself is being anti-Semitic on Twitter. So if you're supporting Black Lives Matter, are you supporting anti-Semitism?
One person who happened to grab that Twitter name before anybody else.
No, there's an actual movement here. That's the thing. It's not just a label. It is kind of a grassroots campaign.
But it isn't a political party or anything, and it's not. I can support the fact that I think black people and black lives matter, and I don't think they should be killed at the hands of police. I don't think anybody should be killed at the hands of police, but I definitely disagree and would like to highlight the fact that black people seem to be killed more than other races at the hands of police.
Where?
And I think it's something that needs looked into.
It's definitely not the case in the UK. White people die more at the hands of police in this country. I just want to get to the point that if these companies are jumping on this bandwagon and using a label that is associated with all these negative connotations, and there is a movement behind it, it's not just a campaign that's abstract. If companies like Sony and Microsoft and EA and Activision and Bethesda and Ubisoft and Naughty Dog, Insomniac Games, Riot Games, if all these companies are jumping on this bandwagon and say, look, we are supporting Black Lives Matter, rather than saying we think black people are important or we care about race, are they alienating some of their audience, and are they at risk of becoming associated with all the negative connotations of the campaign?
I think the issue is that to the average layman, like myself, who thinks, well, whoa, there's this thing it's going crazy in America, and then we've started having protests over here. Black Lives Matter. Do you agree, yes or no? Is basically, do you think that black people have the same rights and stuff as everybody else? And to say anything other than yes, I agree, is stupid, and just as a sentiment, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that all these games companies are coming out in support of that sentiment. Mm-hmm. They're not endorsing a movement, party, club.
No, that's not true, because when they force people, and it is forced, because if you don't bow the knee, take the knee, if you don't have their symbols and their signs printed on your t-shirts or your football shirts or whatever, or you have to conform to their to the political bias that they're imposing upon you. You can't.
I'm not wearing any Black Lives Matter.
You can't opt in. But when Twitter has Black Trans Lives Matter, you have to accept that. You can't opt into that. They're telling you what's right and wrong. Morally, they're giving you their opinion. You're forced to abide.
These are people on Twitter. Again, these are people who are saying these things, and all a social media platform is a gigantic town square where everybody can be heard, right? So if a million people are shouting Black Lives Matter, that's a million people shouting Black Lives Matter. Now, I won't get into the problem of botting on Twitter and all social media platforms, which is incredibly heavily used, and they're so easy to spot as well. But that aside, if you've got a million genuine people who are all saying Black Lives Matter, and we think that policing needs to go into reform, let's just focus on America for now. That's a million people saying that. It's not. No one's forcing anybody to. It's just people talking and saying things.
And presumably, the gaming companies, I don't know anything about the industry, but they are trying to sell games and grow their customer base. Presumably, they are making these statements because they've taken a decision that's what their customers want to hear, and it's a good commercial decision for them. I mean, I don't criticize them for doing that, by the way. I just, I think that maybe Amir and Calvin are perhaps reading too much into it.
Look, I just think when I launch Call of Duty, it's escapism. I want to go and shoot some terrorists for a bit. It's an outlet for me. What I don't want is a political lecture in my face. Something. You must support Black Lives Matter. This X, Y, Z. Because also, to me, the phrase is redundant. Of course, I think Black Lives Matter. I don't think, like Adam said, it would be stupid to think otherwise.
The point, though,
and I find it patronising that I'm getting lectured at by a video game.
But the phrase Black Lives Matter doesn't mean Black Lives Matter more than everybody else.
No,
it's
but even
saying,
if it just means that they matter too, I find that patronising redundant, because who wouldn't think that? So I assume that
people in the American police force, evidently.
But I'm not in America. I'm playing a video game in the UK in my bedroom.
Activision is a huge American company.
But you can target these things. It's jumping on a bandwagon to virtue signal, to kind of fall to the peer pressure and look, we're one of those too. We're a good guy.
Is it even effective, Adam?
I mean, I suspect with gaming, and look, before I say anything, every single time I'm going to say, look, I'm no expert on any of this, but I would have thought that there is a stereotype of the gaming industry, and you guys might tell me that this is horrendously wrong or horrendously correct, that shooting games and all of this is somehow corrupting and it encourages violence or whatever. Now, putting aside the truth of that statement or not, presumably these gaming companies think, well, there are a lot of people who think that about us, and so we have some sort of corporate responsibility to do something to counteract that. And maybe that's what this is all about, because it's very easy to point to a game company and say, well, you sell guns, you sell games where people shoot people.
Well, I'm actually part of an EA initiative called the Building a Healthy Communities Council. And there's about 30 people, and at these events like Gamescom and stuff, they'll say, oh, can you meet us at this hotel for an hour? We're going to sit in a room and we'd like to get some thoughts and stuff and feedback from you guys about building healthy communities. So EA are working towards making their games a healthier space for people to game in, whether it's children or adults. Nobody needs to be told that they can die of cancer or their mother and blah 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 and on and on and on from some little keyboard warrior kid on the other side of the
trolling. So
trolling. Well, but there's so much nuance to trolling of being a prankster and being a troll and all that. But I think clearly these game companies do feel a sense of responsibility to set a good example. And like I said, the big movement that's going on in America to stand and say, well, we think Black Lives Matter too, by supporting the idea that Black Lives Matter, and not going into who's running Twitter accounts and who's doing this and who's doing that, but just on a surface level saying, because there might be gamers that are on their platforms who don't think Black Lives Matter, who don't think your life matter, Calvin, because of the colour of your skin.
Well, let's address that very briefly, because by saying Black Lives Matter, you're bringing it down to race. You're identifying and dividing people on race. And by saying Black Lives Matter, whether you mean two or more than or whatever you mean by that context, you're dividing people by the colour of their skin. So people who aren't black are going to think, does my life matter too, or does my life matter less? Okay. And that's why you get people coming out for White Lives Matter, and that's why you get this radicalisation on both sides.
That's just because they're being...
You can call them whatever names you like, but people are going to feel affected and by being divided.
But that's just because they are reading Black Lives Matter and seeing that says, oh, Black Lives Matter, and that's it, and nobody else matters. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is saying.
You can say they're wrong, also, but they have their own opinion and feelings.
Let's say shortly after 9/11, people started wearing the Twin Towers Matter t-shirts, and then somebody goes, oh, but all buildings matter. Yeah. Like, well, all buildings didn't just get hit by some planes. But all races aren't being killed indiscriminately, a larger percentage, by police in America.
But there are a lot of race issues on both sides, and people are entitled to their opinions. So if you divide people up based on an immutable characteristic, people are going to feel offended.
It's literally human nature to be tribalistic. I'm not a campaigner for Black Lives Matter. Yeah. I'm just somebody that thinks that all people, including black people who are specifically campaigning right now, I support them in the fact that their lives matter just as much as mine. And that's where my involvement in Black Lives Matter starts and ends.
This has been a hot topic for a long time. This is where a lot of the Gamergate stuff came from. Do we need to have quotas? Should there be a certain amount of women in video games? Should there be a certain amount of black and minority ethnic people in video games? Does it matter? Do you play video games to look like yourself? And or, like Amir said earlier, we make characters in MMOs that are elves and orcs, and is it a form of escapism? Do you have to have someone that looks exactly like you as your character? What do you think,
No, it's entirely your decision, isn't isn't it? Like if they allow, so this was a big controversy in Battlefield 5 that came out a year and a half, 2 years ago now, where you could play as a lady character in the multiplayer, and there was a lot of people who were going, "Oh my god, they're forcing, like they're rewriting history and all this."
Well, for Hamish's sake, when was that game set?
In World War II. So it's set. The backdrop for Battlefield is World War II. Battlefield is a game where you could strap C4s to the bottom of a tank, bosh it into the air, and snipe a plane with the tank. There's at no point has Battlefield ever purported to be a realistic portrayal of history.
That's not true, because the elements are part of the multiplayer, taking the game out of its context. That it's not designed to do that, is it? And the single player campaign is supposed to be a true representation of history taken in a fantasy.
And in one of the single player missions, you play as I think it's Solaya. I can't remember her name, but in Norway, and it's I think that is loosely based on the true story. There are multiple instances, if they wanted to find instances of women fighting in World War II, in the French Resistance, in the Soviet forces. You know, there's tons of women that fought in World War II, as well as worked, the land armies that worked the fields and fed the armies and stuff like that. So there's plenty of contribution that women did there. All the Battlefield did is said, right, for our multiplayer, which is a sandbox environment on maps where people just go around capturing flags, blah, 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 your avatar can be female. And that caused a huge controversy, which, in my opinion, just unveiled how sexist and ridiculously misogynist certain gamers are. Whether it's a young thing and there's just lots of kids, or whether, unfortunately, there are some men living in a basement in their mum's house who feel that way for some reason as well. But I think that by giving people choice is not a bad thing. So I think that... Sorry, go on.
No, I get your point. I just don't think it... we automatically cancel people out by saying, oh, they're sexist, they're misogynist, and kind of so their opinions don't count. And I think if we look deeper, it's not always the case. There are always extreme elements that probably will be misogynistic and sexist. But there are also a lot of people that think, actually, I want a true representation of this. If you're making something that's a period drama, make it a period drama. And it's the same in television and film.
However,
Les Mis, for example. Jean Valjean... No, not Jean Valjean. Who was the character, the police officer? What's his name? Hamish.
I've not seen it.
Don't look at the token homosexual for the music
theatre. But if you're making a period drama and you kind of replace all the characters with black guys, or with like in Hamilton, or with women where they weren't there in that place, it breaks the illusion. If you want to focus your game on black men or on women, set it in a place where they were prominent. There's nothing against that.
DICE and EA are under absolutely no obligation to represent history truthfully, because they didn't say that they were.
But they are under obligation to represent it falsely.
No Battlefield has ever represented history truthfully. Battlefield 4 is set on a fictional war between America and Russia, or China, I think it is. Battlefield 3 is the America and Russia fictional war as well. They're not games set in fact. They take the backdrop of war, be it modern day or World War II or even World War I for Battlefield 1, and that's what they use to create a sandbox where you can run around and shoot people, because FPSs are a fun game. It's a fun game genre, right? Obviously, if you look at games like Squad or Hell Let Loose or Verdun, these are games which pride themselves on historical accuracy, and absolutely zero people are criticizing them for not letting you play as a female character, because they're saying we're historically accurate games, and these are men on the front lines who fought in these wars at this place, blah 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 blah. I
read a small reference, and I'm again dipping my toe into something which I don't know anything about, but I read that some people criticize the ability, sort of almost the converse of what we're saying, the ability of people to have avatars of different races, especially white people having an avatar of someone from an ethnic minority, as a sort of virtual form of putting on blackface.
Digital blackface. I've actually heard that before.
Right. But I thought that was slightly difficult, because either how are you going to stop people you either give multiple options of different avatars, or you don't. I mean, you're slightly between a rock and a hard place. What's your thoughts on digital blackface?
Well, there's a game called Rust that did this really, really well, and when you start the game for the first time, it randomly generates attributes for your character: skin, muscle tone, height, all this stuff, including penis length. And it was just one of these games where there is nudity.
It's a survival game.
And so some people have little micro chodes, and some people are walking around with like a massive thing flopping around. But you can't change it. It is what it is. You start your character, and you are what you're born, if you like. Oh. And so I found that quite an interesting take on that stuff. I think when it comes to avatars and things, it really depends on how the person is. Well, it's context, right? If somebody creates an avatar of a certain race, and then let's say this game has voice over IP, mic stuff, so they can talk to people, and they start mocking the person of the race they are portraying and being racist and using that as a tool to create a racist avatar, then clearly they should be removed from the game, banned, whatever, because they're abusing that kind of that avatar system. But to say that only people of certain races should be able to play characters that represent that race, it's eggshells, because you can't police. First of all, it's almost impossible to police, right? Yeah. And secondly, who's to say that people shouldn't be able to pick those characters?
Well, I think what I saw, and again, very limited experience, what I saw was this idea that some people were upset about the idea that as a white person could try and sort of experience blackness, but without acknowledging the sort of history and suffering and all of that of being a black person. And sort of, it was a kind of, I mean, it didn't seem convincing to me, because my attitude is, these are video games, have a nice time. But
look, in games, Adam, you pick certain races. You might be an elf, you might be a dwarf, and abusing other races is part of the game. It's just part of the game. I'm kind of struggling, because isn't that part of the ambience of the game? If you're mocking dwarves for being short, and all of a sudden now even that is brought into question, or if I'm a Zabrak in a Star Wars game, and someone exactly, I mean, isn't that part of the game? Isn't that part of the game, a part of the environment, the ability to ridicule other races? And it's not racism, and it's not going to provoke race. I didn't suddenly become this raging racist because of all the games I played and all the characters that I played.
But presumably the difference there, sorry to butt in, is that you can choose to be a dwarf in a game. You're not just told that, it's not like, you're a black man or a Middle Eastern man. And
I choose, but then I can be misogynistic, or I can be racist. I mean, we're not talking about white, black now.
But you'll say, if I'm playing a dwarf in a game with you, and you'll say, "Oh, you're short," it's like, well,
I'm making fun of you all the time because you're short.
So it's no longer an immutable characteristic, is what you're saying, Hamish.
But I chose to be.
Yeah, you chose that.
Next time we play, I could choose to be an elf or a giant or something.
No, I think Adam's opinion on that was very moderate. I think I'm on the same wavelength as him with this. It doesn't matter, and I mean, I've seen Amir play probably more female characters than male characters, but that doesn't make him a transvestite. It's nothing to do with real life,
I only play female characters because I'm not a female, so I want to feel what it's like. I want to experience.
You want people to give you the good drops. That's what you want.
That's true, because female characters are smaller, and so they're more discreet, and also. So
I will often pick a female character if I think they've got a smaller hitbox.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like if the model's so a hitbox, Hamish, in a game is a bounding box drawn around the character where the physics decides whether a bullet hit you and stuff. So a slimmer character can have a smaller hitbox if they've, depending on how the game's been programmed. So I will often try to pick shorter characters, like Oddjob in 007 on the N64. You had to aim down to shoot him because he was below the crosshair level. So it was almost like a little hack because he was so short you couldn't shoot him.
But then do you think that this kind of, you're saying it's not racism, Hamish, because you have a choice, therefore it's not racism.
I'm positing that. I'm not sure I can say with confidence anything about this topic, but
But then, Adam, do you think that these companies are now starting to fiddle with the political correctness of what we can and can't say, what we can and can't do, what is right and wrong, morally right and wrong? Then this is going to become an issue in the future, especially with games like Grand Theft Auto, where there's a lot of atrocious violence, or Red Dead Redemption.
Well, here's the thing: violence, no one gives a shit about. Sorry for I don't know whether this is PG this stream, but I think
we passed that when you talked about mini chodes.
Oh, okay. Well, violence in video games, you can get like 15s and lower that have like blood and all sorts of stuff and crazy violence. And on cartoons, look at Rick and Morty. No one cares about violence. And I don't know why that's the case when there are, there's some horrifying things that you can do in some of these games, graphically, violently, but that's not offensive apparently. But so I mean, offense and what offends people and what doesn't offend people. It's so it is a cultural kind of phenomenon that ebbs and flows, and I think that like the games companies aren't. I don't think they're constantly making an effort to try and steer something. There are hundreds of people that work for these studios, and they all have their own personal opinions, and that's what sways what happens at that company. The people that make the games, right? So if all the people that worked on a specific game were incredibly right-wing or didn't care about the Black Lives Matter movement, their game is probably not going to show support for it, right?
It's interesting that you raised the prospect that people might not be offended by the sort of Grand Theft Auto thing where you're murdering prostitutes left, right, and centre. But if you have a little bit of a microaggression towards your sort of friend in the car, then everyone gets very upset about it. I don't know. I never played Grand Theft Auto. All I ever played was sort of strategy games or things like The Sims.
I think it's a tricky thing to walk the line of. I would never want to purposely offend. I would never want to offend somebody by accident, right? If I want to offend somebody, I'll do it because I want to, but because I disagree with them and like. It's not illegal to offend somebody, right? I can say,
not
like,
yet.
I could. Well, I don't think it ever will be. I think there's a big difference between saying, "Oh, Amir, you're looking really fat since last time I've seen you," or get a haircut or whatever. Then that's just that could be offensive, or maybe stop drinking, Amir. It's bad for you. I mean, maybe that was apple juice. I don't know, but that is, I might offend Amir by saying that, but I'm taking the choice to risk offence by making my words. If somebody's offended by something I said and it's not even directed at them, it's like completely different. It's out of my hands. And if I didn't even mean, if offence wasn't meant, it kind of shouldn't be taken in some respects.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of people that will leap at the chance to be offended on behalf of somebody else or whatever, and it does get frustrating.
So you're not on the Corbynite left. You're
he's
the
not.
common
No, but
sense.
He did start off by saying he's quite moderate.
Yeah.
I think I'm quite moderate.
On some
But
things.
I do believe that without socialist values like the NHS...
The NHS isn't a socialist value, man.
What are you...
The NHS is a cult. But let's not get into the NHS.
No, we're not talking about our NHS.
Our NHS.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think this has been...
I bet he didn't even clap for the NHS, did he?
I did clap once, but I'm not going to get peer pressured into clapping every single week. Look,
did a
this
whole
has been a
episode.
very interesting chat, and honestly, it's been a pleasure having you on, Adam. I think if people want to find you, they go to twitch.com/2angrygamers.
Twitch.tv/2angrygamers TV.
And Adam is there with his good friend Tommy, and they have fantastic stuff, loads of banter, so do go and watch it. Once again, thank you for joining us. It's been great.
No,
and
thanks
hopefully
for
we'll
having
get you on in the future to talk about the NHS or something a bit more controversial. Have a good one, guys.
All right.